punctual fashion, a timely fashion. I will now begin with the official introductions of the second panel, which is talking about the topic methodology, results, and sustainability of the savings groups. The moderator of the panel is Laura Blanco. She is an officer of the Inter-American Network, RIPSO in Spanish, from the OAS, Organization of American States. Through Ripso, Laura works with the ministries of social development and other agencies that are related, academia, and the private sector to facilitate the exchange of information and knowledge between the member states of OAS. In her capacity as an officer, she has participated actively in the development and implementation of exchange methodologies, which have as results more than 50 potential activities of cooperation between countries of Latin America, the Caribbean, and other regions. Additionally, Laura is a producer of the series of virtual seminars, Inter-American Dialogues for Social Protection, and she coordinates the website of Ripso, which lodges the community online. On this panel, we also have John Schiller, Global Advisor of Savings Groups of the International Plan, which will give his presentation of the experience of the International Plan in Africa and Asia. He is a global advisor from the International Plan. He is responsible for the plan of the promotion of the methodology throughout 50 countries in 21 organizations. Before this position, he worked for 5 years in the regional office of Western Africa for the supervision and extension of the microfinancing strategy of that region, which was focused on the dissemination of microfinances, focused mostly on poor rural women and children. Before that, he was a coordinator of microfinancing for the International Plan between 1995 and 2007. This work had 3 donations from U.S. aid, and the purpose was to increase the capacities of that plan through associations with local microfinancing institutions and other promoters of microfinancing. Before working with that plan, John had a long international trajectory supporting the development of rural companies, mostly in Western Africa, with the Association for Productivity and the Peace Corps of the United States since 1978. We also have Guy Vanmeenen, Technical Senior Advisor for Microfinancing in Africa, with the topic Experiences of the Catholic Relief Services, CRS, in Africa. He has developed strategic programs of leadership and technical guidance for the personnel and the partners throughout Africa, whom are in charge of the microfinancing organizations. He is responsible for strengthening the capacities of CRS and their associates, for adapting the best practices and working with local teams in order to foster microfinancing activities and other programs of CRS. He also developed the CELS model, and he is in charge of setting into CRS, setting into motion the more 40 countries, reaching more than 1.2 million members. He also designed the model based on demand called private service providers, in which the communities pay a monthly quote for training. He joined CRS in April as a manager of the microfinancing program in Lebanon. In August of 1998, he was named the Regional Technical Advisor for Microfinancing Institutions in Africa. Then he joined the Eastern Africa Association to support the CRS microfinancing strategies throughout the continent. During this time, he helped the agency to develop their strategies and the framework for microfinancing. Finally, we have Hugh Allen, Executive Director of VSLA. He is a technical senior advisor for microfinancing. He has a PhD in education from the Westminster College of Oxford, founder of VSLA Associates, expert in microfinancing and market development activities and new technologies. He was the main advisor for Involucra with the savings groups, and he realized the potential of these groups. Currently, he's working on promoting this model for multi-sector agencies and in NGOs through VSLA with the objective of providing support to those organizations which participate in the savings groups. He's a member of the development faculty of the New Hampshire University and the training program of microfinances from Volder. He has published books with ETLG with activities related to technology and savings, and he contributed to the practical action. He has a book that was recently published called What is Wrong with Microfinancing. We would like to welcome these panelists to our auditorium. Thank you very much. Good morning. I hope all of you have a little more energy after the coffee break so we can commence with this second panel. First, I would like to thank the organizers on behalf of the OAS and the Inter-American Red of Social Protection. This invitation to moderate this panel about methodologies, results, and sustainability of the savings groups. To provide these venues for exchanging information like this Latin American forum is fundamental for the design and implementation of effective public policies to eradicate poverty and vulnerability in our countries. Thank you. Having said that, the objective of this panel is to present different experiences of some savings groups throughout the year, and based on those results, to propose best practices to implement mass use of these savings groups, and also to present the obstacles and challenges for these groups. Our distinguished panelists will answer the following questions. What are the success factors of your methodology? What has been the growth, or how has the growth been of the programs? What obstacles have you encountered in implementing mass use and escalating these methodologies? And finally, what are the lessons learned? From the OAS and Ripso, we acknowledge the immense value of these savings groups and the impact that they have in the quality of life of those whom are saving. And that's why we consider that it's very relevant to get to know the experiences of other savings groups around the world, specifically Asia and Africa. And before welcoming and giving the floor to our first panelist, I would ask you all to use the headsets because these presentations will be in English. Also, later on, many organizers will be circulating around the auditorium to collect your questions. And the panelists, 2 minutes right before your time is up, I will just give you a sign. Without further ado, I will welcome John Schiller so that he may give his presentation. John Schiller, like was already mentioned, is part of International Plan.
And thank you for inviting me to your forum. I want to also say thank you very much for that very kind introduction. I must confess, though, I'm not a doctor. I'm a promoter. I'm a field person. I'm a programmer, but not a doctor. Nevertheless, I'm very happy to be here. And many of you whom I've met have asked me, is this your first time to Colombia? And the answer is yes. It's not, however, my first time to South America, but the last time I was here was 10 years ago. And I did not have the courage to resurrect my Spanish and to give this presentation in Spanish. So I'm going to speak slowly, I'm going to try to speak clearly, and we will leave the rest to in the good hands of the translators. The program says that I'm going to talk about plans, experiences in Africa and Asia. But I'm actually going to talk about a very specific aspect of our programming, which is with youth. First, I'd like to say that for those of you who don't know PLAN, it's an international NGO. It's been around doing work since 1937. As the introduction said, we're working in 50 countries. Half of those are in Africa, and the other half are in Latin America and Asia. Our mission is to work for the well-being of children, and to do that by working through the communities where they live. We call the approach child-centered community development. And because the needs of children are many and great, we do many things. And we work in most of the traditional sectors, like health, like education, like water and sanitation. We do quite a bit with child protection issues and with gender equality. But we also work with economic security. Economic security has not been a major focus of our programming over our long history, but it's increasingly becoming so. And one of the main reasons it is becoming so is because of savings groups. I can ask for some technical assistance here on how to get rid of this window. As has been mentioned, savings groups had their birth in Niger, a very poor country in the Sahel region of West Africa. Thanks to CARE International, and thanks to Hugh Allen, who worked for CARE, and then who became the worldwide promoter of this methodology. We discovered the methodology back in 2003 when we were looking for an appropriate approach to working with very poor people on the edge of the Sahara Desert. The initial experience was successful, and we're now working in 26 of our program countries are doing savings groups. 22 of those, the great majority, are in Africa. As of October last, we had 963,000 members in those 26 countries. And you can see the great majority of those are in Africa, 97%. As we know, the methodology appeals primarily to women, and that's reflected in our 82% participation rate. We also have about 120,000 children and youth in savings groups that are dedicated either to children or to youth. There are probably many other youth that are integrated into adult savings groups, but we don't track them. We follow the basic VSL, Village Savings and Loan Methodology, as laid out in the manual that Hugh has written and given many trainings on. And the reason this is so, this methodology is so important to plan is that it fits perfectly with our approach to child-centered community development. That is, it's an appropriate methodology for working with the rural poor. It builds social capital. It contributes to better household economic resiliency. And I didn't write it here, but it also conveys direct benefits to children, and it's a way of getting youth involved in financial services. So it's a perfect fit, and it has not been difficult to sell this methodology to plan programs. Okay, why are we doing this with youth? As has been pointed out in some of the other presentations this morning, youth is becoming the next sort of wave of attention in international development. People are acknowledging that the youth bulge in the population represents a serious risk to world stability. If we do not address youth issues, and if we do not help youth make a peaceful and productive transition into a productive adulthood. For us, we had the option of either working through microfinance institutions or banks, or to try the savings group approach. And we decided on savings groups because it's basically, savings groups are a very low-risk way to reach large numbers of youth. It's low risk because the amounts of money are small. There's no pressure to borrow. And it's possible to reach large numbers of people for all of the reasons that have been discussed this morning. It's also an experiential methodology. You're not giving youth lots of theory about financial inclusion or financial management. You're giving them a series of processes and practices that enable them to do something that's very concrete, and it leads to monetary gain. So it's of interest to many people. These groups, as we know, serve as platforms for other services, and in particular for youth, we found that they're appropriate for financial education, for training in basic life skills, and in entrepreneurship training for self-employment. And because of this, they're an important element in preparing youth for either formal employment, which is very difficult in most of the contexts where we're working, but more so in entrepreneurship, where they're able to create and where they need to create their own employment. Okay, the experience I'm going to talk about specifically is one that we lived and actually are still living in West Africa in 3 countries, Niger, Senegal, and Sierra Leone, all of which are very poor. And this effort is thanks to a generous grant, I should say, by the MasterCard Foundation, where they gave us 4.5 years to reach 70,000 youth with a package of services. And when we say youth here, we're talking about 15 to 24-year-olds who are out of school, basically. Some of them never went to school. Some have done a little schooling. Some have done more schooling, but for various reasons had to drop out. So we don't go into schools to recruit youth. We're recruiting youth in communities. And the package of services combines financial services through savings groups, a more formal training in financial literacy or financial education, and then some basic life skills, which basically revolve around behaviors that make it easier, again, to make this passage from youth to adulthood. We also, in one of the countries, have undertaken an experiment to link both individual and savings groups, that is, individual youth and youth in savings groups, with a formal sector financial institution. And in the project as well, we have built, because it's an experiment, we've built a strong learning component. And the learning component is based around 4 elements. It's the savings group's management information system, which of course produces all the information on financial performance. We've undertaken a household survey, a sort of before and after look at a sample of youth in each of the 3 countries, looking at socioeconomic change. We have a program of doing financial diaries in all 3 of the countries. And then there's a component that's managed by youth themselves, which is generating, vetting, and selecting stories of change that happen in their groups, in their communities, to them as individuals, that we call most significant change. It's a methodology. The program approach to this is very important. It's not just a question of working with people who are younger. Basically the same approach as you do with adults. And these are little people. These are young people. They're less sophisticated people. That's not the approach that we've taken. What we've attempted to do is involve youth in every stage of the project and in every phase of the project from the very beginning, so that groups, representative groups of youth were involved in the design of the program. They were instrumental in undertaking initial outreach. We have made many youth into trainers to take over the job of both outreach and then training in life skills and financial education from paid project staff. We've transformed youth into people who are able to give technical assistance to groups through a structured monitoring process. And we've worked a lot on youth leadership development. Okay, so that's sort of the bedrock of this program. But the entry point into working with youth is through savings groups. And they are the place where we start and from which all of these other things can happen. As I said, the other skills or the other components, the other services that the project offers are to develop skills in understanding finance better. And it's more finance at a personal level as opposed to finance that you learn as a member of a group at the community level. But it's also important, we found, to offer these other services because youth are hungry for knowledge. They want to know more. They want their capacities built beyond just being able to save and borrow and receive share-outs. And then the fourth major element is what I would call here a vigorous or a rigorous use of community volunteers. That is, youth who come from groups who take on roles of responsibility as trainers, as facilitators of outreach, and as participating in the management of the program. Now, we're 3.5 years into this project. Actually, the statistics are 3.5 years. We have about 7 months to go until the end next June. So we have some preliminary results on financial performance. We can say some things about linkages with financial institutions in Senegal. And we can talk about how we've seen youth leadership develop, how their capacities have developed, how the whole area of governance by youth has developed through their participation in what we call youth advisory boards, who are a major part of the project. Okay, for financial performance, we are extremely grateful to Hugh Allen for having invented the management information system, and we've actually worked with Hugh. Plan has worked with Hugh over the years to sort of help update it in iterations, new iterations, and we've been a participant in the latest innovation of moving it from an Excel-based platform to one that's based on the web. We've also been, at least we were in West Africa, we were strong advocates of posting our results onto the SAVIX website because we thought that it would be a stimulant to our programs to get more serious about data. Because if you're showing your data to the world, it better be good data. And it has really helped to raise plans' visibility, but also it's made us better data collectors and data analyzers. So what I've done here, I've got 4 slides that show aspects of financial performance, and we've taken, we've got a column here for Niger, we've got a column for Senegal, one for Sierra Leone. We've got the whole project put together, and then we compare it. We compare these metrics with the general population that is on the SAVIX, which is this was done in October. It was just over 2 million members. This first slide here shows the savings group member profile. And you can see, apart from the differences in population, that in terms of male-female participation, we're about the same. In terms of the average group size, youth groups are slightly smaller, but not much. The attendance and the retention rates are almost identical. But where we see a difference is the percentage of members with loans outstanding. And there's a significant difference here, 47, almost 48% for the world, and 32% for youth. So you can see here that youth are a lot more interested in savings, and probably are either afraid or hesitant or just don't know where to invest their savings. So they're taking fewer loans. If we look more closely at savings, we see confirmation of what I just said, where there's a much higher percentage of savings to loans among youth than there is to the general population. So for every dollar they borrow, they're saving more than $2. The general population is about $1.50. The average member saving, as you would expect, is smaller for youth. They have less money. And the average member equity, which is their savings plus what their groups have earned and which belongs to them as individuals, is of course less as well, because the loan funds are generating less income, they're less active. But still, not bad. Not bad for somebody, or not bad for a population that was not saving at all before they joined this program. If we look at loans, there's a huge difference here in the average loan size. It's less than half. The percentage of members with loans outstanding, we've seen that, and loans outstanding as a percentage of performing assets is also significantly lower. So again, confirming this propensity to save and somewhat of a reluctance to borrow. If we look at earnings, 35% is the global average. 24% is significantly lower, but still a very significant return. How many banks pay 24% on savings? And you'll see here that between Senegal, where there's the most economic activity, and Niger, where there's the least, again, the figures here sort of confirm those economic facts. That there's much less to invest in Niger. In fact, we found that what mostly adolescent girls and young women are doing in Niger is saving for their dowry, for marriage, hoping to count on their future spouses as a source of economic support. So there's much less of sort of a drive towards entrepreneurship. And our efficiency, because we've got such large numbers and we're dealing with large numbers of community volunteers, our efficiency is much greater with the youth project than with the adult projects. Okay, in terms of linkages, we're doing this in Senegal, and we've chosen a partner which is called PAMECAS. It's a federation of savings and credit cooperatives. And the reason we chose them is because they had worked with a UN Capital Development Fund project called Youth Start. And the whole purpose of Youth Start is to help MFIs develop youth-friendly products. What PAMECAS has done is they have established products for individual savings, group savings for youth, individual loans, group loans for youth. They have adjusted their conditions to make it easier for youth to save. And the big innovation is setting up mobile banking sites where collectors go around and actually will visit individual youth or youth groups and take their savings. We've established, and this is about in the last 9 months, there are 1,001 youth who have been reached through 55 individual accounts and 39 group accounts. So it's a it's a small start, but it's something. And in addition, we've got now the commitment on PAMECAS's part to provide for those youth that get training, for those youth who take loans for enterprise, to provide training on basic enterprise development. We also found, unexpectedly, that there is linkage occurring spontaneously in Sierra Leone, where groups have just gone to local banks and MFIs and opened savings accounts for to have a safe place to keep their funds. Okay, youth advisory boards. I mentioned these, and this, in my view, this is one of the best things that have come out of this project, because we have here the nuclei of institutions that are run by youth that could result in the sustainability of this project over time. These are democratically elected in each country, and as I said earlier, youth from these participated in the design, the initial situation analysis, sensitization of communities, and outreach. They monitor groups, and they produce technical reports on those monitoring efforts. They played a big role in the recruitment of community volunteers to take over training and outreach functions. They advise management, project management, on the views of youth. They vet and select the most significant change stories, so they're participating in the qualitative monitoring of the project. Representatives of these boards participate in a project-wide steering committee that meets yearly to review and set the course for the project in the coming year, and they represent the project at international events. So quite a bit has been done developing the capacity of these young people. Our takeaways. I have 2 minutes and 11 seconds and 2 slides, so this is good. The big takeaway, savings groups are highly appropriate for both urban and rural youth in the West Africa setting in 3 of the poorest countries in that region. The updated figures, the ones I showed you on the chart showed 81,000, but we have in fact 87,000 youth now who have been reached as of October. The member retention per cycle is 97%, so youth are not, they're not running away, they're not dropping out. Loans past due, we don't normally monitor this metric, but MasterCard S that we do, it's only 1.1%. And as we saw, the annualized return on assets is just under 24%. Okay, takeaway number 2 is what I've been saying, is that you have to involve youth in every aspect of the project from its design all the way through to the end. You have to involve parents, especially when it becomes known that you're going to be working with young people under 18 years. Of course, working with community leaders, and then making good use of youth as ambassadors to communities to continue to create demand. One thing we found is that it's good to avoid training centers as recruitment areas, because training centers, the training courses are of a limited duration. Remember, these are out-of-school youth, some of whom go back for training to get technical skills, vocational skills, but the training centers have short lives, and if you base a savings group on a training center, that savings group is apt to have a short life as well, and just fall apart when the training ends. Okay, we've learned that it's important to have an answer when youth ask the question, well, this is nice, but what next? So we have to keep coming up with other things, other ways of involving them, other sources of information, other types of skills. And that it's necessary to logically integrate these services as opposed to just offering arrays of components. That there has to be sort of a logical progression from organizing a savings groups to learning about financial education to completing the end of the first cycle to engaging in this life skills training. And then the one element that's still remaining, which is entrepreneurship training, comes after that. I see I'm down to 0, but here's the last slide. Working with community volunteers has been very important to the project, as I've tried to indicate. But youth need more coaching. They have to work more in teams with supervisors, and they require some financial support. They cannot work as pure volunteers because they don't have the resources to move around. Youth don't do this for the money, but if they don't have money, they can't do the work. So what we've done is we've paid them, we've decided to pay them a transportation stipend to allow them to go out and create and monitor groups. We need to revisit the whole question of sustainability. Sustainability in the savings group world is usually that you create a savings group, you monitor it, it goes past the first cycle, it becomes autonomous, and it keeps on and on and on and on. And there's a lot of evidence to show that that happens. With youth, it's not sure that that's going to be the outcome, because youth, by the definition, are young people who are becoming something else. They're becoming adults. They get married, they move out, they look for economic opportunity. You can't expect that they're going to stay in the same communities and interact with the same people. So we're beginning to see this now as more of a learning opportunity, as an educational forum for teaching youth about money, about enterprise, and about behaviors that will help them navigate the passage into adulthood. The last point is that much of the learning for us is still to come, because we're coming to the end of the project. We have had regular MIS reports, so we know quite a bit about financial performance. We've had the significant change stories, so we know a bit about the qualitative aspects of what's happening in people's lives. But we don't have the quantitative data yet on the outcomes, the socioeconomic outcomes on the sample groups in the 3 countries that we will be following. And that we'll have reports on this by the middle of next year. And also I should mention the results of the financial diaries. So I'm trying to convey the message that this has been a very positive experience for Plan. We've learned a lot that we think can be transferred into most of our other programs. I thank you for your interest. Looking at you as a group, you seem very attentive. Not many people are doing emails, and that's good. And I hope within the context of Colombia, and I should say that Fundación Plan in Colombia has got quite a good savings group program, and we hope that they will take some of these lessons and do more and more work with youth. And we're going to hear a bit more about that tomorrow when a representative of Fundación Plan gives a presentation. So thanks again. Thanks for being patient with my English, and have a good forum.
Thank you very much, John Schiller, for his presentation of the experiences of Plan International in Africa. Now we're going to give the floor to Guy Vanmeenen from Belgium with the experience of Catholic Relief Services, CRS, in Africa.
Buenos dias. Con permiso, I'm going to have to shift to English as well. Disculpa-me por eso. My name is Guy Vanmeenen. I work for Catholic Relief Services. I also will have to try to speak slowly, because I think what I have in common with Latin Americans is I can speak very quickly when I get passionate about things, so I'll try to go slowly. Today, really, I would like to talk about the aspect of scale, how to scale up savings groups, and then also another aspect of the formation of the savings groups, can that become a business model? Can that be a social entrepreneurship? And that's where I will talk about our private service provider model. Just a few quick words on our SILC model. SILC stands for Savings and Internal Lending Communities. It's just a brand name for savings groups of CRS. And I said this morning already, it's in Africa, I call it sometimes banking in the bush. I mean, there's no infrastructure. People are running the business themselves. So that makes it very cost efficient, as Jeffrey Ash was explaining this morning. As you have seen, if you went to the field visit on Tuesday, also savings groups Silk in Africa look very much the same. People self-select, they come together in groups. Groups in Africa tend to be a little bit bigger, 22 people on average. They come together, they save into a social fund for emergencies, they have their savings fund, and with the savings they start interlending that to each other. So very similar. Most groups as well have no external credit. They're in very rural areas, especially in the remote areas in Africa where we work. They're very independent and they're kind of self-regulated, because they're regulating themselves by their constitution. Maybe just a small difference in a Silk program. You can see the box. I mean, everyone probably saw the famous box, so we use the same. But we don't use a passbook system. We have a central ledger. And apart from the central ledger, we combine that with memory-based bookkeeping, which we think is the ideal combination for very illiterate populations. But at the same time, it also allows us to do away with the share system. We don't have a share system. We do have minimum and maximum savings. For example, let's say minimum savings is 100, and you can go up to 5 times 500. But because we don't have shares, people have much more flexibility in savings. It means they can also save now 160 shillings, for example, or 270. Instead of, if you have to buy shares, it would be only 100, or you have to buy 200. But you can't buy 2.5 shares, for example. So it gives you more flexibility in the model and in the savings. Just as here, I mean, people save on a regular basis. The loan fund is being used for a whole variety of different activities, which is going to change depending on the season. Seasonality is going to be important. So if this was a diagram by month, you would see this pie chart kind of constantly changing. You see about 70% is for productive activities, 30% for consumption. Social fund, as here as well, can be used for different expenses. Now, what I really want to talk about is kind of the dilemma of in development in general. If we talk in development, is this question about sustainability. And what does sustainability mean? For most projects is the question like, what is going to stay behind after the end of a project? And I think we have to ask the same question for savings groups as well. Can we leave something behind that's going to help create more savings group after the project has finished? And starting to think around this, we started coming up with this business model that we call the private service provider model, where we're looking at social entrepreneurs in local villages that are now going to train groups, but the groups are going to pay. They're going to pay for training. So instead of having project-paid agents in our program, now we have the community paying the agent or the private service provider. So it's a very, very different model. And I'll go a little bit more into detail in how that is working. But the thought around that is that once the project finishes, you're going to leave behind a local structure. And that local structure is going to be owned by the community, it's going to be run by the community, and it's also going to be paid for by the community. And I think that's where the sustainability is coming from. Let me just go a little bit more in detail. Now, in a project cycle, to do a private service provider model, we need about 2 years, 24 months. That's the top line you can see there. And then there are 3 distinct phases. First 3 months is the preparation phase, then we go in the field agent phase, and then in the private service provider phase. And let me just extrapolate a little bit on that. The first 3 months is really about, you have a project, you have a certain budget. You start doing your outreach modeling. What does that mean? You know, with that certain budget, how many supervisors can you hire, how many agents are you going to be able to work with, and then those agents, how many groups can they form? So that will give you an idea about general outreach that you're going to have for a certain amount of money. Based on that, then you will have to start thinking about what is going to be my area mapping. And for example, for a certain amount of money, maybe this is here our geographical area. Let's say with all the tables are different villages in our geographical area. Once you have defined that, then you're going to have to start thinking about, in the preparation phase, about now where would I like to have my agents operating from? And that's a very crucial question, because remember, we want to create markets for these agents because they're going to start earning money. So they want to have a market that's going to be big enough for them so it becomes kind of a part of a livelihood, full-time or part-time livelihood. So if this is the area, you're going to try to sprinkle those agents around in the area. And you're going to have to define which village, which is represented by a table, is kind of central. And then around that first village, you're going to leave enough villages available so that agent will have a market as you go over the years. So that agent can start saturating a certain area, which we define about 15 kilometers from the home village, where the agent is around that village. So now we have defined home villages. Why is that important? Because the recruitment of the agents is going to come from those home villages, because you want to have those social entrepreneurs identified in that village where you're going to start your work. That is a very important aspect, because they live there, they know the culture, they know the community, they know the people, which is kind of fundamental for starting to create kind of the market for them, because people know them. Very important point. So once you know that, then you can go into those villages and start talking about, well, this is a future program coming, this is how it's going to work. This is about fee for services. This means like savings groups are going to have to pay for training. So then you go ahead with the recruitment and the initial training. So you see on the slide induction training. That's the first day of 8 days training where the field agents come together and you train them. It's only at the end of the 8 days you're going to make your final selection. We often train up to 40 agents to select 20. You want to get the best. And the best is also the people that are entrepreneurial, that have that esprit, they say in French, you know, thinking about like, this is business, I'm going to make money with this. You want to find that typology of agents. And we have criteria around that. How do you identify those? Then you roll them out into the field. They start in their home villages, they start forming groups. One thing we do is, initially, because they're still on the training, they're being supervised, we don't want, initially in the first few months, that their learning curve, that the cost of the learning curve, in a sense, needs to be paid by the first groups. So what we do is we give out a couple of free groups. What does that mean? We go into a village and we say, like, well, in this village here, you're going to get one group for free, because we're still training the agent, so you shouldn't pay for his learning curve. But after that, any other group that wants to be formed, you're going to have to pay it. That's preparing your market. It's the same like when you're selling soap. You know, you go into a certain area, you want to sell soap, you give like a little sample, a free sample. And you spread that around, and that's how you start preparing your market. So you do the same in this geographical zone here. You spread around just free samples, a couple free samples, so people can see how it works, demonstration effect takes place. But right from the beginning, you said, I was like, this is only one free sample. If you like the soap, if you like the methodology, then you're going to have to pay. The second group is going to have to pay. Very important aspect, because you're setting the right expectations right from the beginning. This is fee for service. And then we bring them back in for a refresher training. There's also probation period. If they don't do well after 2 months and they don't form a number of groups that is predetermined, you can remove them. And then you continue with the second refresh training in the 6th month. So that means after 6 months of training and mentoring, that they're now ready for certification. So it means that after 7 to 9 months, they can go for the certification exam. And I'm going to come back to that to give you just a little bit more detail on how we certify a private service provider. Meaning that the status from field agent, now I get certified and I become a private service provider. Once they become private service providers, now we have them living in the different villages. We also try to put them in informal networks, meaning that they will visit each other on a monthly basis and they start supporting each other. It's kind of a peer support. If they have technical questions like, hey, what are you doing in your village? I had this problem, I solved it like this. Also promotion and marketing. It's also about price setting, that they have like equal price among the different villages. So there's not too much internal competition there. And also about quality control, that they control each other on, are you doing a good job? I mean, how is this going? So they come together in a peer network. Now, the network itself, what they can do as well is, if there's enough demand, the PSPs can also take on apprentices. Maybe I'm a PSP now, but I have so much demand, there may be 40, 50 groups that want my services, I can take on someone else to help me. And then we as a network now, we can also certify now that apprentice. So now we have also a system to replicate the agents, the private service providers. Now we replicate them. We can get more of them. So Now we're starting to think about scaling up the program. Let me just go to the next slide and just go a little bit more in detail about the certification itself. So like I was explaining, you have this field agent phase, training and mentoring, and then they're certified, they're private service providers, fee for service, the communities are paying them. Now, how do you certify them? Certification is based on three main elements. First element is customer feedback. We go back to the groups that this agent has been working with, and we just go talk to the customer. What do you think of this agent? How is he doing? Is he doing well? Is he providing you good service? What do you think? So just customer feedback. Secondly, we look also at the financial health of the savings group that this agent is working with. Like John was showing, we start looking at what are the different indicators. Are they profitable? Are they saving well? Are they using the loans? And so on. So that's your second factor. And then the last test is a panel interview. That agent now has to appear before a panel. We have standardized questions around that. So just to gauge if that person really has the technical know-how on to do this. So on those three parts of the exam, if you do better than 80%, you get your certificate. Now you get your diploma. Very important. I don't know how important it is here, but in Africa, if you have a certificate or diploma, that means something. And we roll them back out into the villages. We make a big celebration around that. We roll them back out. We go to the village and say like, hey, look, this person, I'm certified. Look, here is the certificate. This person can now work independently and provide quality to the savings groups. And this is the fee. This is the fee you have to pay. So we roll them back out. So that's kind of in short how this business model is working. So what we're achieving now, I started off with saying like, this is about sustainability. Now, with the PSP model, we have 3 levels of sustainability. If you think about it, I mean, your typical savings group, after 1 year, has been well trained, they can continue on their own. So that's your first level, lowest level of sustainability. The group survives and continues on their own. I mean, there's studies about that. Hugh Allen can talk about that. Over many years, I think after 4 years, 89% of all the groups are still functioning. Groups are sustainable, they continue. First level of sustainability. Second level of sustainability, we have our private service provider. So even if the project is not there anymore, that private service provider keeps making money by forming new groups. So now you have a system to replicate groups at quality because you have a certified person, certified teacher that keeps working in the community, forming more and more groups. That's your second level of sustainability. The highest level of sustainability now, the third level is how do we replicate those private service providers? And that's through the network. So they can take on an apprentice and then also certify that apprentice. As a network, post-project, they can do now their own certification. So 3 levels of sustainability. Over the last few years, we've been working on this model since 2008, so 5-6 years. We did a random control trial as well, where we really were studying like the difference between a project-paid agent, where the project is paying, subsidized, or the community paying the private service provider. And we were comparing those 2 channels. And along those different topics, what's very interesting to see in performance is that we saw there was no difference in poverty outreach. Because we were afraid of that. Because now the community has to pay, so does that mean that this private service provider is going to go to more richer people in the community? Our random control trial shows us no, we have exactly the same poverty outreach. Even if the community has to pay, we still have the same outreach. We know that about 80% are below $2.25 a day poverty line. About 30 to 50% are below the 1.25 a day poverty line. We see also group quality and financial performance, and I think this is very important. The effect of having to pay for a service makes that the savings groups are actually performing much better than the ones that are subsidized. And we see that in the data. They're doing more savings, they're doing more internal lending, and then of course they're more profitable, and they're also growing. They're growing faster than any of the other groups. So they're much stronger groups. Financial performance is much higher. They're much more entrepreneurial. And even it has an effect on the village. If in a village you have a private service provider, we have statistical evidence that that village becomes more entrepreneurial. It shifts people's minds by saying like, hey, we can do something for our own development, and we're kind of paying for our own development, and we're taking charge of this. And this private service provider is part of our community. So we get some very strong results with that.
Do you have a minute and a half left to wrap up and then start the video?
Okay, yeah, great.
You said it's 7 minutes,
fine.
right?
No, that's perfect.
Okay.
Maybe if Giovanni, can someone help me with the video to start it up? No? Okay, I'll try to do it. Just last thing on growth and scale. When we started, when I started with Silicon, with CRS, we started looking at it, worked with Hugh Allen in 2005, 2006, we started rolling it out. If you can put on the video. We started rolling it out in 3 countries at the time. I rolled it out also in an internal displaced camp in South Sudan. Very difficult situation, but we were able to do it there. So that moment I knew this model is going to work anywhere. And like you see it here as well. At the end of that year, we had 9,000 clients. As of today, I'm working now in 37 countries and we have 1.2 million clients. We have over 1,500 private service providers roaming around in Africa, making a livelihood of savings. And I can tell you about the theory, but I also want to show you now a short video that shows you the practice. Thank you.
When I ride my bicycle through the village, I imagine how my life was when I was young. And I really pray that my children live better than how I was and enjoy their life. My name is Philip Kimutai Kogo. I live in Eldoret, Rift Valley in Kenya. Most of our people in Eldoret are farmers. As farmers, many people were not able to access funds to plant their farms because planting needs huge capital. So during May, June, July, we don't have enough crops in our area and there is a lot of anger. How can they access the little loans that can sustain themselves? Because if you want to borrow money from other institutions that are lending money, you are supposed to give out maybe a guarantor of a title deed or your animals. People were becoming poorer and poorer and poorer every year. As a private service provider, my job is to explain the benefits of silk to the community and to help organize them into silk groups. As a PSP, I train and support groups until they can do things on their own, and they pay for that service.
A silk is a group open to both men and women. They meet every week, and members serve at every meeting. Members take out loans and repay with interest. After about 1 year, groups share out all the money. Every member gets back the savings plus a profit. And then they start a new cycle of savings and lending.
Menisaidia hivi biashara yangu. Naanza kwanza na vile nilianza kukopa loan.
And from the savings they are able to invest.
Kununua kuku. Sasa vile kuku ilianza kutaga, kwa nilikuwa nachukua mayai nauza kwa wholesale.
The benefit is improved livelihood within the community.
Nilikuwa nikisanya karibu yangu kreti 2, naanza nanunua ngine ya majirani, naongeza nauza yote. Sasa vile hiyo pesa ikiingia, narudisha kwa, nanisaidia kurudisha kwa loan. Zingine natumia kwa nyumba. Sasa sishiki matope kuandika nyumba.
People have cultivated the culture of saving.
Hata wenye wataingia secondary, nitakuwa nikiwawekea pesa ndio wakiingia shule hakuna kusumbukana ati wanahitaji wanafukuzwa school fees.
There is also a social fund meant to take care of emergencies for members, for example sickness and funeral expenses.
Wakati huyu jirani wetu Mama Lilian alikuwa amepoteza msichana yake. Sasa kuna pesa tulitoa kidogo kusaidia yeye huyo mama.
Ni kazi ngumu sana. Kila mtu, kila kijana ako na family yake na watoto yake. Sasa hawana macho sana ya kuangalia hawa yatima. Ni mimi ni nyanya yao kuangalia kitu nafaa, waende shule, warudi wakule vizuri, wanawe vizuri. Kabla ya mimi kuingia SEEP, ilikuwa nahangaika sana kimawazo, ilikuwa nahangaika sana vile nitaishi, sababu ilikuwa shida sana kupata pesa. Mimi sasa huyo kama chairlady naenda ambia nimefungukiwa mali, huyo chairlady atakutana na group, ataongea nao, watachukua siku moja wanitembelee nyumbani, waniletee kila mtu kidogo kidogo. Hiyo ndio group inafanya.
The benefits for using the private service provider approach is the groups continue being formed and getting services on SEEP. SEEP members select their own officials, they set their own rules, all the money comes from members. SEEP is truly member-owned.
What you have seen in Kenya is that PSP model is cost-effective and sustainable. It's very encouraging to visit a SEEP group after 1 year and see members self-reliant.
When I started, I was moving around, giving out information about SEEP methodology, going to churches, ceremonies, chiefs, barasas. But now, people are coming to me. They are looking for me. They are looking for SEEP services. I chose to work with an apprentice because the SEEP demand. People were demanding they need to be trained on SEEP.
I was myself a SEEP member. I saw what Philip was doing to my group and I liked it. So I asked Philip, how can I become one of the PSPs? And he told me, I have to be an apprentice. My job as an apprentice is to mobilize the community, train the groups, and monitor in collaboration with my PSP, Philip. Philip trains me and how to train groups, and then supervises me whenever I'm training other groups. And finally, I'll be certified just like the other PSPs. And I'll be independent. I'll do everything on my own.
In SEEP, people learn to manage money, access loans, and they have got a huge impact in the community.
SEEP imetusaidia sana, sababu tukikaa chini tunaongea na mzee, tunakuwa free, na pia watoto wanatufurahia, wanaona kazi vile tunafanya. Sasa mimi naona hiyo imenifanya kabisa tukue na upendo kati yangu na mzee. Tunasikizana, tunajadiliana vizuri.
Naona kampuni ya SEEP kama familia yangu, sababu tunakaribiana kwa shida zetu, kwa kukawa mawazo, tunakawa pamoja mawazo, na kuna usaidizi ndani kimawazo. SEEP ako na upendo ya kusanya watu wengi, na hata watu wengi wanatamani kuingia SEEP.
The private service provider model is really working here in Eldoret, and CRIS is going to take it all over Kenya, in Africa, and all over the world.
It has actually changed my life. My children are going to good schools, we eat well, we dress smart, not stay without a coin in my pocket. Like the other days, whoever came up with this idea, I don't know how he thought about it, because it is helping and it has changed our people. I wish this project could have been started some years back during our time, but it's not yet too late because our children will enjoy. I've seen the impact of SEEP in my community, and as a PSP, I'm going to make sure that it reaches everyone.
Thank you very much, Gian, for Catholic Relief Services, por la presentación, el video. Before I give over the mic to our last guest speaker, I want to remind you that we are already receiving the questions for this panel. Please hand in your questions. Not every day do you have 3 experts in front of you, so please take advantage of this opportunity. And now I would like to ask you for the well-recognized Hugh Allen founder and CEO of VSLA Associates.
Good morning, everyone. I have to thank this forum, like John, for awarding me an honorary doctorate, but I'm afraid I have to reject it because I haven't written my thesis yet. I'm just plain Mr. It's a great pleasure to be here. It's a great pleasure to renew my acquaintance with IED, with Jaime and Carlos and many of his field teams, and to see that after such a short time, there's a very large constituency of savings groups growing in this country with a huge potential for more. The groundwork that has been done is encouraging, and I'm sure that in the future years we will see many hundreds of thousands of people in Colombia who are members of these groups. Now, how do I describe myself? Well, I think the best way is I would use a phrase that Jeff Ash uses. I'm a refugee from microfinance. And why am I a refugee? I worked for CARE for many years, and I was helping them promote microfinance organizations in different countries in Africa. And the work was successful, but we noticed over time that it was really tending to benefit people who were not our target group. It was benefiting urban and peri-urban entrepreneurs, but it wasn't reaching the rural poor because microfinance institutions found it too expensive to travel long distances at very high cost to provide credit to people whose demands for credit were quite small. And also I noticed that it wasn't providing the product that people needed, which was savings. Savings appeared to be far more important than anything else. But in 1991, I took a visit to Niger, and I came across this young woman who was from Norway called Moira Eknes. And she had been sent out to Niger to start a handicraft project. But the women quickly made it clear that they knew more about handicrafts than she did. But they did say they needed to find a way of saving and borrowing. And because she was not a microfinance expert, she, instead of looking at conventional models of microfinance, she looked at traditional models of microfinance. And she said, how can we change this so that it begins to reach the rural poor with the services that they want? So all the work that has been done over the years has come out of that very small initial spark. And all of us in the savings group movement are indebted to Moira. I'm just sorry she couldn't be here to see in Colombia how well it's going. Okay, one of the things we found pretty quickly was that people who were creating these savings groups, people who were the employees of programs, they absolutely loved it. But we didn't really know very much about what was going on. When we challenged them and said, well, can you tell us, for example, how many groups do you have? They would say, well, I think it's about 300, 320, something like that. And you would ask more questions, and the answers would all come back as, well, it's something like this or it's something like that. And we realized there was going to be a need to begin to measure what we were doing if we were ever to have this sector taken seriously by the world of microfinance and by the development industry in general. So, where are we now? We did put in place mechanisms for counting what was going on, and right now, these are the numbers that we're looking at. These represent the raw numbers of members in different parts of the world. And you'll see that in Africa, there are over nearly 8 million people in Africa doing this. There are 567,000 in Asia and 287,000 in Latin America, 8.7 million in total. Now, these figures are derived from the practitioner organizations that you've heard about, the usual suspects, the CARES, the CRSs, the plans, the World Visions, but it doesn't take into account the work of many local organizations that are also busily creating groups. And what it doesn't take into account is the fact that there is a lot of replication going on that is much more difficult to measure. And it is likely that the number is much greater than we see here, possibly as much as double. This is what's going on currently in Latin America in terms of the methodology. Pardon me, let me just do that again. Right. You'll notice that of all the countries, Colombia has by far the largest. The next largest is in, where is it? Yes, Ecuador, with 60,000 people. A program started over 10 years ago by the Peace Corps, and just quietly moving along, creating a few groups here and there, but accumulating the numbers. So although Latin America is at a relatively preliminary stage of being able to operate at significant scale, the evidence is clear that there is acceptance in the marketplace and there is a significant demand for services. Now, if we break down what is going on in Colombia, these are the scale of the programs that we know about. The largest program is what I call other here, and unfortunately I really feel embarrassed about this because this 62,000 figure is IED Vital. That's what happens when you change your presentation at the last moment. Okay. Sorry, Jaime, I owe you a beer. Plan has 12,000 and the other players are relatively small. But 76,184 is the current number that we know about. Okay, now what we've done over the years is we've put in place a management information system which is used by virtually all of the practitioner organizations. And from this we have derived information which can be posted by organizations on a website which we call the SAVIX, the Savings Group Information Exchange, and that is the URL for the Savings Group Information Exchange. This website is hosting information on over 92,000 groups, something like 177 projects in 26 countries, and they report usually their data on a quarterly basis. So if we look at what is going on in some of the metrics that are being derived from this system, we see that we have 24 countries, 178 projects, 92,712 groups, and 2 million people. This is the data that is being captured worldwide. It is approximately 30%, 28% of the total sector at this time. And we've got some key metrics from it that I think are of significance. We have found that the savings per member is $45. This is the annualized savings per member. The ratio of savings to loans is 152%, but most significantly, the ratio of loans to total assets is only about 50%, which means that while many people assume that the poor want to borrow, the evidence is very clear that the demand, at least in terms of savings groups, is for a savings service, which underscores the point that was made at the presentations earlier today. We find also that the return on assets is 35% globally. So a person who is putting $1 into a savings group will get $1.35 at the end of the year. In Latin America, the return on assets is less because the interest rates generally charged here are less than in Africa. We find also that the costs are declining. We started out with $50 a member, and globally it is running now at about $22 per member. So if you want to design a large-scale program, you can generally use this as a rule of thumb as to what it will cost you to train one member, and you can then design your programming accordingly. But we are also finding out that local organizations which do not have a direct relationship with international organizations are beginning to be able to do this for less than $10. We're finding that there is an 89% 4-year survival rate. Groups that have existed for 4 years, 89% of them are surviving. And we're finding that there is increasing member investment. The member savings in groups over a 4-year period is more than doubling. And we're finding that group-paid community-based trainers are actually the most effective. We have compared them with volunteer trainers, and we tend to find that group quality is better, and we also tend to find that the people are staying in the work longer. There's quite a debate about this, and it varies from place to place, but the general evidence is that the PSP type model is proving to be the most effective in terms of sustaining training once a program has left. Now, next I have some metrics from a study that we have been doing over the last 4 years. We've been tracking 331 groups in 6 countries, and we've been visiting them round about the end of March every year. What are we finding? Well, we found that the total number of members has declined, and the total number of groups has gone from 331 down to 296. That's 89% survival. We are finding that the percentage of women members is increasing, that the retention rate of members per cycle is very high, and very significantly, which I'm going to discuss more in a moment, that after 4 years, wherever there was a group created, you go back 4 years later and there are 2 additional groups. That's why I say we don't know how big this sector is, but it could be huge. This is a very, very important finding, and I'm going to touch on it in a few moments. Next thing, we're finding that the average loans outstanding per group has doubled, more than doubled. The average value has gone up, not quite double, about 80% more. We're finding that the percentage of members is climbing from 53% to 68%. People are becoming more confident about borrowing. Okay, I'm back. Thank you. Okay, isn't technology wonderful? When people start talking to me about using cell phones in savings groups, I get very nervous. Okay. Interestingly here, we are finding that with this sample that we are tracking, that the loans outstanding as a percent of total assets is climbing, but still remains less than the total. This particular cohort is a much more active cohort in terms of borrowing than the global cohort. We're finding that total assets per group has more or less doubled, liabilities are virtually zero, and the globalized annual return on assets is 38.4% from this particular sample. Okay, what I wanted to talk to you now is I wanted to shift away from the performance of savings groups. We know they work. We know they're highly profitable. We know they are very, very sustainable. We know they increase their capitalization, and members really love to be members. What we did is we went to Uganda and we studied 20 groups. We looked at 10 groups from CARE and 10 groups from CRS. And we then decided we would try and find out how many groups had been created from this particular sample. What did we find? We found that there was a replication rate, which I've already mentioned, of 1.99 groups per foundation group. How did we actually identify those groups? We said, okay, we have groups that are formed by a formally trained person in an organization like CARE or PLAN or CRS. Did the groups that we visited meet the classic criteria for a VSLA or a SILC? In which case, we excluded them from the study because they were project trained. We then also looked at groups which were not formed by an agent trained by CARE, and we then classified them into 3 categories. Those that were self-formed, they had completely spontaneously formed, and those that were trained by a graduated village agent, and those that were simply influenced by what was going on. And what we found was really, really fascinating. We found that 2/3 of the group, 61%, had spontaneously formed themselves. There wasn't a promoter, there wasn't a village agent. They had seen what was going on. We were beginning to see peer-to-peer viral spread of this methodology because people simply know each other, watch what each other are doing, and adopt the methodology. However, having said that the village agents didn't create the groups, it then turned out that in about half of the cases, they were instrumental in helping the groups at critical points in their development to become good groups. And by the way, we found also that the groups were far more willing to pay a silk PSP or a village agent if they had spontaneously formed than if they had been formed by the village agent. Village agents who promoted groups found it rather difficult to get pay from the members, but if the groups had spontaneously formed, they were ready to pay. Very dramatic finding. So, what were the issues that one other thing, loan access. It's a bit difficult to see this graph. There are some comparisons here. These are groups which were trained by the project, and they tended to have a very, very high level of loan access of members, about 90%. We found that agent-formed groups, that is to say the PSPs, loan access was slightly lower. We found that self-formed groups, it was about 62 or 63%. What we found was that there was a higher concentration of loans among relatively fewer people. But we also found very significantly that taken in general, replicated groups tended, if you aggregate the numbers, they tended to actually end up with larger rates of return. They were more profitable than groups that had been formally trained by a formal agency. We don't quite know why. A few extra replication issues for further study. We found that about 30% of people belonged to multiple groups, and the researchers thought this was a very bad thing. But then I used a principle I always use when I think about savings groups, and that is to say, how would I feel if somebody told me that me having 2 bank accounts was a bad thing? I would tell them it was none of their business. And I think that the membership in multiple groups can be regarded positively as people begin to seek to diversify and manage their household cash flow from a multitude of sources. We found, as I said, that spontaneous groups are more likely to pay for community-based trainer services than groups mobilized. How should this influence our approach? Do we need to invest less in community-based trainers? I don't know. Are spontaneous groups likely to be more durable over time? We don't know yet. But the evidence is that they probably are. In Zanzibar, CARE created 43 groups between the year 2000 and the year 2002. Then they left the island. They packed their bags and went. There are now over 250 groups in Zanzibar, because the people they left behind as informal trainers and the viral spread has just led to this replication. And when I looked at that about 3 years ago, when there were 150 groups, only 1 group had ceased to operate. How important is it to retain some influence over the evolution of the methodology as informal replication predominates? As we see groups virally creating their own savings and credit groups by copying what others are doing, is there a role for us? Of course, as NGOs, we never want to say goodbye. It's in our DNA to want to be essential. It is very hard for us to say, we've done our job, it's time to leave. But I really think we have to address that question. If you want to look at this study, this is the URL. It's available on the internet. Okay, a few concluding remarks about trends in the industry. Where is the industry headed with savings groups? What is the upside? What are the positive things? The positive things is that savings groups are credible. We have, I don't know, 300 people in this room. We had 250 people in Arusha from all over the world. There is now a general recognition across the industry that these are not just amateurs playing in the sandbox, but serious microfinance that is durable and having a major impact on people's lives. They're here to stay. Because there is also a significant impact on family well-being and social capital. Programs are moving from very small scale and local to being national in scope, and IED is moving in that direction. There is a widespread use of village agents. Now, in Colombia, there has not yet been a use of village agents, but I see this as an inevitable evolution for the future. Financial inclusion. There is a great deal of interest in how groups can be financially included, and many people in Africa think that the way is through the use of mobile phone technology. What are the downsides, or the possible downsides? And here I'm going to be not entirely neutral, I'm going to be a little bit opinionated. Those of you who know me will know that that is quite usual. I think there is too much focus on reducing costs at the expense of quality. There's been this whole culture of saying, we've got to do this for $5 a person or less, or we've got to do it for less than $10. Why? Is that a lot of money to spend to get a poor person into a situation that they've stabilized their livelihood? Why is it not legitimate to spend more than $10 on a very poor person, where in a microfinance institution, we're perfectly happy to spend a couple of $100 to make sure that that institution becomes sustainable? So I think we have to question this, because when we look at the replication rates, anything, so if, for example, if I say we're spending $15 on creating an individual member of a savings group, and I come back 3 years later and there are 3 groups, my net effective cost is only $5. So we need to take this cost per member metric away from being in the front of our eyes to say quality is more important, and the drop in costs as spontaneous replication happens will occur later. We need to be more confident about that. There's too much enthusiasm for external credit, and I'm really happy to be here and hear all this talk about savings is important. My mother-in-law said to me once, "What do you do for a living?" And I said, "I work with projects that provide savings and credit services to poor people." And she said, "Oh, well, savings is good, but credit is for rich people." I think she said something very, very wise. Credit is, let's use another word. Let's not talk about savings and loans or savings and credit. Let's talk about savings and debt. Would you like a loan? Yes. Would you like a debt? Oh, no. But a loan is a debt. And poor people are terrified of risks associated with debt, and that's why savings groups work. Not because they are necessarily the most convenient, but simply because they cater to people's sense that they are safe when they save with a savings group, and they are also safe when they borrow, because the members will understand the need for flexibility when things go wrong. So we need to temper our enthusiasm for this external credit. We need to stop talking about financial inclusion as if the savings group is not part of financial inclusion. If you are a member of a savings group, you are then much more a part of the financial world of your local community than you ever were before. And the notion that you need to engineer a credit relationship with a regulated financial institution needs to be approached with a great deal of care. We have a tendency to stay too long, and I need to improve my spelling. We don't know how to say goodbye. I've already talked about that. And there is insufficient respect for what savings groups are and what they are not. The savings group is not an institution that needs to significantly evolve, to become more sophisticated, larger scale, better structured. It isn't. It is what it is, and it isn't what it isn't. What gets transformed, or what needs transformation, or what the transformation result is at the level of the person who is a member of a savings group and through that experience begins to have broader horizons and can take advantage of other opportunities that the economy can offer without those opportunities being engineered and delivered on a spoon. So, things for the governments and the formal sector to consider. Don't assume that the formal sector offers superior products. Can you compete in terms of accessibility? Can you compete in terms of transparency? When I go to the bank, my money disappears. I don't know what happens to it. Can I compete in terms of profitability? Deutsche Bank gives me 0.5%. The average savings group gives 35%. Can the formal sector offer flexibility in terms of loan structuring, loan repayment, savings opportunities? Do financial institutions, regulated financial institutions, offer social benefit through participation as a client? So before the formal sector assumes that it is simply a superior entity for which a liaison needs to be constructed, it needs to consider in what ways it can provide services that are superior to those offered by the savings group. Next, be careful about regulation. People who think that savings groups should be regulated are not really being very realistic. It's not very possible that you can regulate something like 400,000 savings groups in the developing world. Can you actually do it? Will it add value? And will it actually protect the consumer? The regulated formal sector in the United States and the developed world wasn't very good at protecting the consumer over the last 4 or 5 years. So getting a religion about we need to regulate savings groups because they're unsafe is a very questionable proposition. So finally, things for implementing agencies to consider. This was 2 days ago in Colombia. Are you serious about self-reliance, autonomy, self-management? How does this show itself in what you do? Are you willing to let these groups go? Or are you going to say, now we must do something else with these groups? At what point are we going to say a person is strengthened by lifting weights with their own arms, rather than saying, let us help you lift that weight? And should you keep it simple? That's another thing. Keeping things simple is a lot harder than making things complicated. Clever people make things complicated. It takes a really clever person to keep them simple. And I will leave you with that thought. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the panelists for their presentations and to the public for the quantity of questions that we have. I think we only have 15 minutes left, and we'll try to cover as many questions as possible, but perhaps we will do this in both languages because many of the questions came initially in English, so I will request the assistance from our interpreters. First of all, I'm going to ask 2 questions to Key. The first one.
Model rely on the fees that they collect from their groups as their main source of income, or does it complement with other income generating activities? And then the other question, which is actually from 3 people, how is the salary of the person who is the PSP provider determined? Is it determined by the model itself or the community?
Great, thank you very much. I mean, 2 excellent questions. I think, the first one is it the main source of income? I would say no. In most cases, it's kind of a part-time livelihood. So it means that most people will still continue doing some of the businesses they were doing before. and then add on this as an activity. You especially see that in rural communities, you know, where often the PSPs also do their own farming and so on. So when anyone else is on farming, I mean, they will do their own farming, and then in the afternoon, whenever they have time, they will go out and start being the PSP and earning money with that. Then a very crucial question on how do you define that the price structure, in a sense, for the PSPs. And there are two elements to that, because initially, like I said, we will subsidize a couple of groups in the first few months. But we want also, at that moment, we're giving a small stipend to the agent based on the number of groups they have. We want to keep the stipend as low as possible, so that once the agent becomes certified and a private service provider, that the earnings per group are higher in the future. So you start providing a career track. The way we do calculate that is we look at two things. We now look at what is an acceptable percentage maybe of the minimum savings as per the constitution of a group. Often we look at maybe 10%. For example, a group that saves, let's say the minimum savings is 100, maximum 500. If it's 100, we look maybe at 10%, and that on a monthly basis. So there would be 40 whatever shillings on a monthly basis per person in the group that goes to the PSP. And then we compare that as well, looking at our data to see, like, I mean, how much does it represent from the profit, in a sense, that the group is making. Yeah, because that's that element of consumer protection. We have a manual around this that's very detailed, that is also publicly available, so there's a much more detail in that. But it's, yeah, looking at the dot. Is it enough money for the PSP to make it into a livelihood? Is it not too much so that you have still the consumer protection and you're not extorting money from the people? Yeah.
Just to follow up with that question, is any standard of cost of living in a particular country taken into account to determine this, or is solely based on the performance of the group?
It's not necessarily based on the performance of the group, it's really based on how much the group is going to save. And then, of course, then there's the question, like, if you're going to see then differences in income depending on the area where the PSP is working. Yeah? Because if it's a very poor area, normally you would like to see as well that savings groups, probably the minimum savings are going to be lower, which means also that your income is going to be lower. But as you're living in that same community, it's still going to be comparable with any of the other livelihoods in that community. And so I think it balances out then.
This question is in Spanish also. Esta pregunta está en español. Do risks of fraud or bad management of the funds, and how does Catholic Relief Services do the control or monitoring so that the methodology can be replicated based on CRS's principles?
I think that's another excellent question. I think there are two aspects to that. Within the traditional model, SILOC, VSLA, there are already a lot of key points built in that will help the group with transparency, with accountability, and with fraud management, in a sense. And you just have to think about, okay, there's the box, there is the passbooks or the ledger, there's a savings to loan ratio, and so on. So there's a lot of crucial points in the model already that will help you deal with fraud and bad management. Now, the other question, of course, is once now you have a private service provider that is being paid, how do we as an organization initially protect against maybe a PSP, for example, starting to go into behavior that's not conducive for the group. And what we start to do around that is we do part of the training is that we come up with a code of conduct. So we have a written and also written contract with each of the groups. So the PSP will go into a written contract with the group they're forming for a 1-year period, in which clearly is delineated what are the activities they can do and how the PSP should conduct themselves towards the group. Just a quick example is, for example, a PSP should never touch, never, ever, any of the money of the group. So simple things are in there, but that is part as well of the training. And the messaging that's going to go through through the villages as well. So that gets known, and then people know, okay, this is the conduct we want to see.
Thank you. So now for John, and these are in English as well. So the first two, what strategy did you adopt to promote savings accounts among the youth? And what were the main motivations of them in deciding to open individual or group accounts?
Okay, it was really the partner that we chose, Pamecas in the instance of Senegal, that had an outreach strategy that was directed at attracting youth. And as I mentioned on one of the slides, what they did was to set up mobile collection centers. And around these collection centers, they formed savings clubs, in effect, where youth could join and where their savings would be collected by a representative of the Savings and Credit Cooperative. So what they did was they made it easy. They combined that with education. They had a campaign of sensitizing youth to the advantages of belonging to a savings and credit cooperative, in addition to belonging to a savings group, that made it sound attractive if youth were interested in certain services that were offered by the cooperatives. So it was a question of the provider understanding the needs or the possible needs of the youth population, and then setting up a message and mechanisms to facilitate youth becoming members. And the second question was?
The second one was, what were the main motivations of them in deciding to open individual or group accounts?
I think the group account, the main motivation for opening a group account is initially to have a safe place to keep extra money. So it's security. The main motivation in opening an individual account is that within groups you have what they call in West Africa high flyers. These are people who are more entrepreneurial, more ambitious, perhaps have greater capacity, and their need for finance outstrips what the groups can provide in terms of local resources. So in order not to be constrained by the group, they sort of branch out on their own. But they don't quit the group because they still see that the services offered by the group are useful. But they need other services. So they're taking the next step as individuals to access those services.
Okay, this question is also in English and is partially related to that question. And besides security, having the money in a safe place, was there a particular reason why in Sierra Leone the saving groups started saving in formal institutions?
Well, I think yes. Down the road, in the back of the minds of the members, I think there is this this desire to acquire more capital for their funds. The slide I showed you showed a very low loan utilization rate. One of the reasons it was so low on the slide is because we've just opened a number of new projects in rural areas where borrowing really hasn't started yet. So that has pulled down the number. But in the capital city of Freetown, there's hunger for credit. And I think the hunger is beginning to outstrip the ability of savings groups to provide loans, because again, the 3-to-1 ratio of savings to loans is constraining certain individuals. So safe place to keep money, but in the back of their minds is also a future demand for credit.
Thank you. There's another question that is directed at you, but I think the audience would benefit from also your insights. And this one is in Spanish, so you might want to use your headset. ¿A qué se debe o tienen un análisis de por qué los niños, niñas y jóvenes solo quieren ahorrar pero temen acceder a préstamos? So let's start with you.
I think it's because of inexperience. It's because they're new players in the game, so to speak. I think they may be getting, some of them may be getting advice from their parents. Be careful. It's like when your child obtains their first credit card, you become very afraid. But I think it's just it's basically a lack of ideas as to how to use the money. And that's why being member of a group where ideas are exchanged, where you're learning about finance as a group, where you're learning about finance as an individual. And the big missing piece in our project so far has been this lack of training and sensitization on entrepreneurship development. And this is a piece that we're working on now and are going to introduce next year. So that's my take on it.
Okay, I can respond. I can't really respond to this in terms of what happens with youth because I haven't any experience in that area. But I think that in general, when people join savings groups, almost by definition, they're people who are financially excluded, whose level of confidence in terms of finance and risk is very, very low. And so they prefer to simply save in order to minimize risk and incrementally begin to take on additional risk as they start to take out small loans. One of the major advantages of savings groups is this 3-to-1 ratio. It can be constraining if you're a confident entrepreneur and you really, really are well established and you really want to expand your enterprise activity. But for a poor person, making sure that they are saving at the same time as they are beginning to borrow limits the amount that they can borrow so that the risks they take are very, very much proportionate to their demonstrated capacity already to save.
Now, a question for you in Spanish. Desde su experiencia, ¿al cabo de qué tiempo se logra un nivel de apropiación o autonomía por parte de los miembros de los grupos sobre la cultura del ahorro?
There are many different opinions on this. For example, I won't mention the institution, but there is an institution that visits a group 33 times over a year and continues to visit it every 3 or 4 months thereafter, more or less indefinitely. On the other hand, you have organizations that are very, very disciplined, visit the group only 15 times in a year, and the group is independent. There are people who think that you can even train people in how to create a savings group using cell phone messaging on smartphones. I'm rather skeptical about that myself. I do think that the human element is rather important, but nevertheless, there's a wide range of opinion on this. My view is this. You don't really need to visit a group more than 15, maximum 20 times in a year, and it can be independent if you've done your job reasonably well. In terms of how long does it take them confidently to manage what they're doing, probably about 3 months, for 2 to 3 months for savings, maybe 4 to 5 months for credit. The role of the field officer in continuing a relationship with the group is not really to train them. It is simply to reinforce procedural behavior so that people develop habits that enable them to transact in a reliable and consistent fashion. But stretching it out beyond a year is, in my view, not in most cases necessary, and I do think that there needs to be less of a tendency to assume that significantly extended periods are necessary.
We don't have much time left, but just one last question to quickly wrap this up. And we saw the wonders of the implementation of these programs in Africa, particularly. But I think it's also important to know what are the main challenges and obstacles that you guys have faced in your agencies while implementing, and also what are the challenges for the sustainability of these programs?
The challenges that I've seen don't come from the groups. they come from the implementing organizations. And it's having implementing organizations that do their jobs seriously and well. One failing that we often see is that there's a lack of supervision on the part of the implementing agency to make sure that the promoters are doing a good job. In the budgets are built in the position of supervisor. The supervisor is supposed to go visit the groups along with the field agents and make sure that the methodology is being properly implemented. That piece is often missing, and it results in the quality of groups going down, the quality of projects going down, and the system doesn't work the way it should. The saving grace, however, of savings groups is that you can do the methodology poorly and still get a good result.
That's an interesting insight. Guy, do you have anything to
add? I think in our case, especially for working on a PSP model, the fee for services, I think one of the biggest challenges and thing that we learned over the last few years is really about having a very streamlined communication strategy so that you can set the right expectations at each level. And that's working with your program manager, your partner, and then going to the community and explaining them how this is going to work beforehand and be very standardized about that and have the same messages over and over again. It's all about setting expectations and communications in the end. Yeah.
I would underscore what John has said. The biggest weakness tends to be that organizations think that because the methodology is very simple and transparent, that somehow you don't have to manage the process. You have to be just as disciplined and thoughtful and organized in the way you manage one of these programs as you do any other kind of program. Depending upon the methodology to rescue you because it's simple enough and it will mitigate any sloppiness that you have imposed upon it is not really a solution.
Bueno, creo que con esto damos por finalizado el panel número.
I think we have finished the second panel. Thank you very much to our three panelists and to the audience for their questions.